Yeah, I worked at Irrational on BioShock and at 2K Marin on BioShock 2.
And before that?
Before that, I worked at, my first job in the industry was at a place called Human Head Studios, where I worked on various projects. And then I worked at Blue Fang Games in Boston, the now defunct Blue Fang Games in Boston for a little less than a year. And that was years ago, before I joined Irrational.
Why did you decide to come to Double Fine?
I mean, I had been a fan of their stuff since day one, pretty much. And I knew that they were in the Bay Area, and I knew that one thing that got me very interested in them, because I played and enjoyed Psychonauts and Brutal, but it was really their moving to multiple projects, multiple smaller projects, that interested me a lot, because I mean, that's fairly, they were definitely like a AAA studio before, where they made a big game that took 2 or 3 years, 2, 3, 4, or 5, whatever years. But then all of a sudden they were doing this thing where, they were making smaller scale downloadable games, and I noticed, like, oh yeah, and it's not just the Tim show anymore. Not that it had been before on Psychonauts and Brutal, but it was like, I'm seeing specifically these other people coming to the fore and leading these other projects. And that's really interesting, because usually the model is, a game auteur comes up and, like, they're calling the shots and they're perceived to call the shots, in the way that the media reports about them. It's like, what's Tim Schafer going to do next? And people do care about that, and rightfully so. But I found it really interesting and inspiring that he had done this thing with his studio. And I think it was partly, as a survival move, because it's like, we don't want to keep making these super long haul, huge budget games that if they fall through, then we have 50 to 100 people getting laid off or something. So I mean, and it seems to have worked out. We're still here, and I'm working on another new kind of project of that scale. So yeah, and that's really cool. And I really liked coming from the BioShock games, which were these big epics with that took many years to develop and had a lot of complexity to them and a lot of creative decisions. I'm working with Ron, of course, now, so that's another big game industry name that I'm working with. But I really like it. Everybody here is very down to earth and extremely talented, and they collaborate really well. So yeah, and that's I got the scent of that, at least when I interviewed here, and so yeah, they just. And I also really loved the Bay Area, so I was like, well, gee, yeah, they seem like a good place to land. So
like, what's it feel like being in a position like that? Like, if the industry had any celebrities back then, it was people like Ron.
Yeah, absolutely. It was amazing. I mean, the first time that I interviewed there, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm having lunch with Tim and Ron, and. It's been amazing. I kind of learned, like at Irrational, I worked with Ken, and I was a fan of the Looking Glass games and of Irrational's stuff, and just that whole lineage of like immersive sim games, all that sort of stuff. I've definitely experienced like working with a hero before. I hope everybody gets to do it at least once in their career, because you realize that, oh yeah, these are just real people who are trying to make the best decisions, and they're really just, they're on the same path as you. Just they're at a different point on that. And yeah, like working with Ron has been fantastic. He has like no ego, really, and he's super technical and practical. He knows how to think stuff through, and that's really what our design meetings are a lot of times. It's just like, okay, here's an idea. Okay, we think that's funny. We think that's going to be interesting, but let's break it down. Let's figure out all the implications of it. What happens if the player does this or that? Yeah, just thinking it through, really. And I think that stems from his background as one of the original generation of programmer designers. Like, yes, I'm thinking creatively and I have a wacky idea, but I'm going to sit down and write code to make that happen. And I think that, like, the degree of honesty and perspective that you get with that is really, really valuable. And that's partly what I've patterned my own career after, like knowing how to program, but doing it with an eye towards these creative design goals.
Do you see a separation between that with the larger companies, since you have such huge staffs and people have to pretty much like focus on more singular paths?
Yeah, it does tend to, I think on most big projects, on projects that have like 50, 60, 100 or more people on it, if your creative director is writing code, that's probably a bad sign. That's probably a sign that you've got a micromanager. I think it depends on the studio, you know, because I mean, some studios do really have like a relatively flexible thing. Obviously at Valve, people wear a bunch of different hats and it's unclear who does what because everybody does a little of everything. I think it depends, but on the whole, you know, like when you read about, I don't know too many people or who work at Ubisoft or places like that, but when you hear about 1,000 people working on Assassin's Creed or something, that's like, I can't, like those people have to be, if they color out of the lines, everything flies to pieces, and they're just gonna have to course correct anyway. It's something that like I was one of the people that they asked to come out and found 2K Marin. That's how I got out on the West Coast. Is I was at Irrational, and then they were like, hey, we're starting up a new 2K studio. Do you want to come and help build the team? And so I hired like the level design department. And we always did look for people who could collaborate, people who understood art and design and were technical enough. Like we found that makes people better collaborators. Like they're able to see the world from another discipline's perspective, and that makes them 10 times more effective when they have to like, okay, well I want to make this change that's going to be good for design, but I know that that's going to go against something that art's been pushing for, but I'll bet I know how we can work it out, or I have an idea that saves that and makes it all work. So, you know, and that's something that I found in spades here at Double Fine. Like people understand, you know, everybody fills gaps and knows how to talk to each other. So. Do
you find yourself able to contribute more to the project here, like personally?
Yes, and I think that's more because it's a smaller project than anything. You know, like that much more of the total work on the project is resting on my shoulders compared to if I was on a team of 50 people. So. So yeah, definitely. But I think also because like the hierarchy is relatively flat, and you know, I mean, I'm also, you know, I'm like a senior designer, so you know, I'm in on, you know, they trust me with important stuff. So, but yeah, absolutely. I feel like I have a lot of agency as far as, you know, if there was something that I really didn't like that was in the game, I could speak up and be listened to, and if I had a really good idea that could improve the game, that would, you know, there's not really any reason it wouldn't go in.
How much do you draw from your history of like growing up playing adventure games when you're coming up with ideas for this one, which is sort of like a reimagining of the adventure game?
Yeah, definitely a lot. I mean, when talking design stuff with Ron, you know, there will almost always be some parallel, like, oh, this is like the mixing drink puzzle from Monkey Island 2. I guess I haven't played any of those super recently, like in the past year or two, but I've played them enough over the years with Scum VM and stuff that, yeah, I've just, you know, I can just kind of draw them out. And I do forget some details, like I forgot how long Guybrush Threepwood can hold his breath, but, you know, the basic, like the design patterns stick in your head. And yeah, I mean, I definitely drew from that. I wish I had even more. I wish I had played every single Sierra game and every single weird European adventure game, you know, just because I'd be that much more, you know, knowledgeable about it. But, you know, I know enough to be able to help out.
What's the value you see in those games? Like why would you want to play them all? Like, what would you draw from it?
Well, I think because an adventure game puzzle is solving a unique, weird problem each time, because it's special case design, like I was talking about yesterday, you kind of have to think through the rules each time you come up with a new one. You're like, okay, well, this is sort of like this old puzzle. And so, and I knew that one had these downsides because I got stuck on it back in the day. So how would I improve that, or how do we translate it into this new sort of thing that we're working on? I mean, puzzles are pretty rarely derivative because people would, I think, spot that instantly. Compared to copying like a game mechanic in a first-person shooter or something, you probably can't really just lift an adventure game mechanic wholesale. But you know, I mean, it's like, I think it's probably comparable to just what having an encyclopedic knowledge of anything in any field would get you. You know, if you listen to every kind of music under the sun and you're a musician, then you can pull from something and know what the context is, and you know, understand what you're copying, what you're learning from.
How excited are you that there's actually going to be a new game in this style that Tim and Ron are making, that you'll get to play?
It's really cool, yeah. I mean, it's sort of, there's a lot of creators that I want to see them return to their roots, you know? I really want Peter Molyneux to just be forced to make another God game with like 3 guys and some Amigas. just, you know, do that again and you'll make something great. I just know it, man. John Romero was talking about like, oh, well, I think I might make another FPS game. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, maybe you could, you know, go back to the well with Doom or something and do something like that. So yeah, it's very exciting. As I think people have said, people are still making adventure games. Adventure games are more alive now than they've ever been. You know, you've got Telltale and a whole bunch of European folks and indies. So, you know, it's a great time for them. But I think also having like a high profile, like big budget comparatively, I'm guessing, flagship kind of thing, and you know, from one of the godfathers of the genre, you know, I think that's really cool. That'll, you know, because that'll inspire some, you know, some younger folks will play that and be like, oh yeah, adventure games were cool, or I've never seen them before, but they seem cool. I'm going to try to make one, or I'm going to dig further back into the past and look at this. So, you know, I think like it's a refreshing reminder that good ideas in game design rarely ever die away completely. You know, and that's comforting and inspiring.
You have all these different audiences that are behind this project, and they're all going to be expecting different things, I would guess.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and it's hard to say, you know, because you have as many perceptions as different perceptions of those as you have players, really. I don't think, I really hope that we don't run afoul of a lot of people thinking, well, this is the only, I'm expecting the Double Fine adventure to rekindle everything that I felt in my childhood when I first played Day of the Tentacle or something.
But now I know that I must go back to the mansion.
You know, because yeah, I've gone back and played a lot of old dear games over the years, and you know, they're not going to be quite that same thing. I mean, sometimes they really do have that rosy glow to them, but other times they don't, and you know, that's partly because you're a different person. You know, you don't step in the same river twice, and like, you know, it's gonna be a different thing. And I think there's still a lot there. I wouldn't, you know, be as excited about the Kickstarter project as I would be if I knew that there wasn't still some real meat to that. It's weird the way nostalgia works, because you have none of it when you're first seeing something. When you're playing something for the first time, you don't have any nostalgia. You're just taking it at face value. You're appreciating it for what it does well. So yeah, that's going to be weird. Like, I think there's going to be some critics and players like scratching their heads and being like, "Oh yeah, I guess adventure games they're weird. Like, where's the fighting? I'm not shooting anybody. I'm not jumping on anything." I think it could potentially. I think one reason that I'm happy adventure games, you know, are experiencing a rebirth, is because adventure games expand the kinds of interactions that you have with games. I think games are only really going to become a respected and broad art form that has real cultural cachet and appreciation once they can express more of the human condition. And there's only really so much of human experience that you can express when you're shooting at things and jumping on things. And adventure games, even though they approached it in a weird kind of way with like special case design and these sort of, you know, like, you express yourself weirdly in an adventure game, but I think they do give you the ability to have interactions with a game, with a world, and with characters that are really different from other types of games out there. And I think that's going to make new gamers out of people. I think people, you know, games get written up in the New Yorker sometimes and in the New York Times, and you know, I always kind of wonder, like, oh yeah, they're hearing all this good stuff about a game like BioShock or something, but then they're going to buy BioShock and boot it up, and they're going to be shooting hundreds of mentally deranged people in the head in like a scary, dark place underwater for several hours. And there is a lot of stuff there. I mean, I'm incredibly proud of the work I did on that, but it's like, but it still has these barriers to entry. And it's not like adventure games don't have barriers to entry, but they are getting you to grips with these interactions that I think people have a more innate understanding and appreciation of. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, I'm talking to characters. I'm messing around with objects. Oh, I have to figure out how to get through this door. I don't need to be, I don't know, you know, like there's different kinds of barriers to entry. New kinds of people will appreciate that. You know, I've wanted to make a game that my mother could play for many, many years, and Double Fine is probably the closest I've come to it so far. Just because, you know, a lot of other games I've worked on have been scary action games with lots of violence.
Do you feel like they've been stagnating all this time? Has there not been like enough innovation to sort of keep them evolving?
Possibly. When you have something like adventure games are driven a lot by special case design and by content, and so innovations in games like that tend to come from innovations in content. And so I think that's one reason. Like Grim Fandango, it was like technologically, it was one of the first 3D adventure games. You know, that was pretty interesting and different and new. But you know, it was a pretty conventional adventure game in a lot of ways. You know, take like stepping back from the interface stuff. You know, that it was pretty straightforward. It was like, okay, puzzles, dialogue, inventory, whatever. And I don't really know how you, without going full on into a very different style of game, like just a pure puzzle game or something. I don't know what I think. So I think what Grim Fandango, like one of the most innovative things that Grim Fandango did was just in its setting and the way that it told its story. You know. And so I think, you know, innovating in adventure games does partly mean innovating in art style and in the kind of world that you create. You know, and that's something that I think Double Fine has kept up, even though Double Fine has not really been making adventure games per se, that they have kept up that pace of innovation. Because Psychonauts was a completely crazy new thing, and Brutal was really different and awesome and interesting.
It's almost as if you start to make an adventure game anything other than like a 2D graphic adventure, it does just become another genre.
Yeah, the mechanics tend to displace the other things about it, and it becomes like, well, yeah, if you can run and jump on things in Psychonauts, then yeah, guess what? It's a platformer with adventure elements. That's where it gets into the whole like definition thing. You know, it's like, sure, I mean, I don't know what it is, but it's, you know, it's got these things in it, and it's interesting, and it does have some of this. It does have some of the mechanics and some of those little sensibilities that I loved in the old games. And like, I mean, when I first played Psychonauts, that's what I was really appreciating. I was like, okay, yeah, this has enough adventure game in it that I like that, and the platforming is cool, so.
I work in the sewers.
Gross. What a terrible job that must be. I would never let you date my daughter.
And yeah, I mean, that's an interesting idea, like the fact that if you did innovate within any established style of game too much, would it even still be that style of game? Like, I remember when Portal came out, people were like, well, it's not a first-person shooter because you're not really, you know, shooting bullets at guys and dealing damage, but it is first-person, so maybe it's a first-person puzzler. And there had been first-person puzzle games before, kind of, but since then, there have certainly been a bunch, you know, and it's its own thing. And now if you said first-person puzzler, people would know exactly what you were talking about, and I would be interested, because I'd be like, okay, well, I've done plenty of first-person shooting, but hey, puzzling, I'll do that in, you know, so long as it's not a blatant Portal ripoff or something like that, I'm really interested. So I don't know. I mean, that's another great, you know, like if adventure games did branch out into like these little subgenres where people were like, oh well, yeah, it's a character-centric adventure game where the dialogue trees are really deep and there's some sort of character AI and social sim or something like that. I mean, that's very dear to my heart. Like that's some of the stuff I've done in my independent projects. But big old genres like decaying and decomposing into other subgenres, you know, like, because yeah, first-person games decomposed into, they didn't die, but they did sprout into multiple things. So now there's first-person stealth games and first-person like spectacle-based tunnel shooters and first-person like, you know, immersive sims were kind of their own thing. So yeah, and I think that's wonderful. I think that's the natural cycle of life in any creative thing, is that, you know, like, well, we got sick of Westerns, but now we're doing like, you know, supernatural Westerns, or just, you know, a new take on Westerns that's like more grounded and historical, or more fantastical and weird, whatever, you know, stuff splits off and evolves like that. You have to color outside the lines a little bit, and I think that's what, like that Psychonauts was definitely a case of that. It's like, okay, well, I can't make an adventure game anymore, but I think I can make this other style of game and bring some of that in. And I guess Psychonauts is still definitely like a platformer. It ended up very solidly in that ground, but it is kind of a different one, and it probably did expand that people's boundary idea of what those could be, and that's great, because then, you know, I mean, if the ultimate purpose of a genre is just to diffuse until it's just thoroughly colonized the creative space around it, that's actually great, because it means that we've discovered all of this new territory in games, which is really the most important thing.